Right now, you can walk to a tap, fill a glass, and drink clean water without a single thought. You do it half asleep. You do it without looking. For almost all of human history, that simple act was a gamble with your life. So people found another way. For hundreds of years across all of medieval Europe, the safest thing in your cup wasn't water, it was beer. And the reason why isn't the one you've been told. Because you've probably heard the tidy version. Medieval water was filthy, crawling with disease, so people drank beer instead to avoid it. Simple, clean, repeated in 1,000 documentaries. There's just one problem. It's only half true, and the real story is stranger and says something uncomfortable about how we live right now. Let's start with a number. By some accounts, a monk or a hard laborer in medieval England drank close to a gallon of beer a day. Not on a feast day, not to get drunk. And it wasn't only them. Beer was an everyday drink for men, women, and very often children too. That sounds insane until you learn what that beer actually was. It was called small beer. Weak, cloudy, barely alcoholic, brewed to be a food more than a drink. Closer to liquid bread than to anything you'd order tonight. A medieval family didn't drink beer to escape reality. They drank it to survive the day. So why not just drink the water? Here's where the myth starts to fall apart. Medieval people did drink water, plenty of it. If you lived beside a clean spring or a fast upland stream, you drank from it freely, and nobody thought twice. Rivers, wells, and rainwater cisterns fed towns across Europe for centuries. In London, records show conduits were built to pipe fresh spring water into the city for ordinary people to collect. The idea that everyone avoided water entirely is simply wrong. People weren't stupid. They knew fresh water when they saw it. The problem wasn't water itself. It was crowded water. Because here's what happened when people started packing into towns. Human and animal waste ran through open channels in the streets. It seeped into wells. It drained into the same rivers people drank from downstream. Nobody understood germs. Nobody knew that invisible organisms in that water could destroy a body. They just knew that in certain places at certain times, the water made you sick. And sick could mean dead. And this is the grim part most people skip over. Contaminated water carried diseases like dysentery, cholera, and typhoid. Dysentery alone, which medieval people called the bloody flux, killed on a staggering scale. It stripped the body of fluid until organs failed. It swept through armies and cities and killed kings. King John of England died of it in 1216. It killed King Henry V of England on campaign in 1422, one of the most feared soldiers in Europe, taken out not by a sword, but by a drink of bad water. A single contaminated well could empty a household in a week. This wasn't a rare tragedy. It was a constant, grinding background threat that everyone lived beside their entire lives. So people leaned on the drink they could trust. And here's the part that's genuinely fascinating, because it's a case of humans being right for completely the wrong reasons. Brewing beer without anyone knowing why made water safe. To brew, you first have to boil the water. Boiling kills the organisms that make you sick. Then the fermentation itself, the alcohol and the acidity, made it hostile to many of the germs that thrived in still water. On top of that, brewers added hops, and hops have natural preservative properties that helped the drink resist spoilage. No one in the year 1200 could have told you a single word of the science. They had no idea bacteria existed. They just knew, across generations of watching people live and die, that beer was safe and questionable, water was a risk, so they trusted the beer. But here's where it gets really interesting, because beer wasn't just safer, it was smarter. That gallon a day wasn't empty. Small beer was packed with calories from the grain, plus B vitamins produced during fermentation. For a laborer swinging a scythe from sunrise to sunset, those calories were fuel. The beer was breakfast, lunch, and hydration all at once. It was the original energy drink 500 years before anyone printed the phrase. And it delivered that fuel in a form that wouldn't give you the bloody flux. In a world with no refrigeration and no clean plumbing, that combination was close to miraculous. Now, there's one more piece, and it's the one that ties the whole thing together. Who was brewing all this beer? For much of the medieval period, a huge amount of it came out of monasteries. Monks brewed on an industrial scale, refined the recipes, and even brewed extra strong batches to sustain themselves through religious fasts when they weren't allowed solid food. They called it liquid bread, and the church approved. There's a reason some of the most famous beers in the world still carry the names of monastic orders to this day. But brewing wasn't only a monk's job. In ordinary households, it was usually women's work. The alewife, a woman who brewed and sold ale from her own home, was one of the few businesses a medieval woman could run independently. She'd hang a bundle of greenery or a pole outside her door to signal a fresh batch was ready. There's a popular theory that the classic image of the witch, the pointed hat, the cauldron, the broom by the door, the cat, may have roots in the everyday tools and signs of the medieval alewife. It's a debated idea, and some historians push back on it, but the overlap is hard to ignore. The person keeping your town alive and hydrated was as likely to be a widow with a brewing kettle as a monk in a robe. And beer wasn't the only answer. It was the northern one. Look south, to France, Italy, and Spain, and the drink of choice wasn't beer at all. It was wine. The split came down to something simple: climate. Grapes grow easily in the warm south, grain in the cooler north, so Europe drank along a line drawn by the weather itself. But wine did the exact same job beer did up north. The fermentation made it safer than the local water, and watered-down wine was the everyday drink for rich and poor alike across the Mediterranean world. There was a class line, too. A wealthy lord in England might drink imported wine to show his status, while his field workers drank the small beer brewed on the estate. Same problem, safe hydration, solved two different ways depending on where you stood on the map and how much you owned. Whether it was a monk's ale in Germany or a watered cup of wine in Tuscany, the underlying trick was identical. Let the fermentation do the work the plumbing couldn't. So here's the full picture. Medieval people didn't drink beer because all water was poison. That's the myth. They drank it because in a crowded world without sanitation, beer was the reliable choice. It was safe when the water wasn't. It was food when food was scarce. It was clean by accident, nutritious by design, and woven into daily life from the monastery to the peasant's table. The tidy story gets the conclusion right and the reason completely wrong. And that's the uncomfortable part I promised you at the start. Think about what it actually took to make water safe. For most of human history, clean water wasn't a right. It was a project. It took boiling, brewing, fermenting, hops, monasteries, alewives, generations of trial and death, an entire craft built around not dying from your own drink. You skip all of it. You turn a handle and it appears clean, cold, and free. And you don't even watch your own hand as you do it. A medieval brewer would look at your kitchen tap and see something close to magic. A source of safe water so reliable, so endless, that you've stopped noticing it exists. That gallon of small beer they drank every day was their best answer to a problem you will never once have to think about. So the next time you fill a glass without looking, look. For 1,000 years, that was the hardest problem in the world to solve, and you solved it before you were even fully awake.